Long considered to be the most northern of the southern states and the most southern of the northern states, West Virginia is a state known for its scenic vistas and mountain views, but it could be just as well known for its unique history. For example, it was in West Virginia that the United States built a bunker that was designed to protect the United States Congress in the case of nuclear war. The more than 100,000 square foot facility built more than 700 feet below the Greenbrier Hotel in Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, was completed in 1961 and remained active clear until the 1990s when the Washington Post revealed its existence and it was decommissioned. And there is another piece of nearly forgotten American history that also occurred in Greenbrier County. This one in the 1890s. Because the curious story of one of the only known trials in history to include the testimony of a ghost deserves to be remembered. West Virginia joined the Union during the Civil War, splitting from the rest of Virginia, which joined the Confederacy. However, the people living in what would become West Virginia desired separate statehood long before that fatal break. There were differences in ethnicity and views about what constituted appropriate taxation and government representation, among other issues. About 1/3 of the population of Virginia lived in its western counties. When the Virginia legislature voted to secede from the Union in 1861, the overall vote was 88 to 55. Of the 55 dissenters, 29 of the representatives were from West Virginia. In response to the vote, and outraged at the result, 2 conventions were held in Wheeling, in which a separate pro-Union government was elected. The new governor was Francis H. Pierpont, and he made the new state capital of what was called the restored government of Virginia in Wheeling, later moving it to Alexandria. In April the following year, a referendum was held, both upholding the new government and putting forth a resolution to split from the rest of Virginia. The vote was extremely popular, with a final vote of 18,862 to 514. President Abraham Lincoln wrote to Pierpont advising, "Make haste slowly. Things are improving by time. Draw up your proclamation carefully, and if you please, let me see it before issuing." The vote in the U.S. Congress to allow statehood ran along party lines, but the formation of West Virginia was approved. There was some concern about slavery in the new state, as Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation specifically only applied to those states in rebellion against the Union. But a senator named Waitman Wiley, one of the founders of West Virginia and a slave owner himself, crafted an amendment creating gradual emancipation for the slaves within the proposed state's counties. That amendment was approved by the voters, and statehood moved forward. On April 20th, 1863, Abraham Lincoln announced that West Virginia would become a state after a 60-day waiting period. On June 20th, the 35th state joined the Union. Elva Zona Hester was born in West Virginia in 1873, 10 years after its formation. Not much is known about her life other than what survives through oral tradition. She was a bit of a free spirit for the time period, having a child out of wedlock in 1895. The next year, Zona met a blacksmith by the name of Erasmus Stribling Shue, who was going by the name of Edward, but people in the town called him Trout. Shue was more than a decade older than Zona. They had a whirlwind courtship and married in November 1896. By all accounts, the couple seemed to be happy and in love. However, Zona's mother, Mary Jane Robinson Hester, reportedly had her doubts, both about the man and the short courtship. Then, in January the next year, an 11-year-old neighbor who helped Zona around the house discovered her body at the foot of the stairs in her home. Reports from the time described the scene. The body was lying stretched out, perfectly straight, with feet together, one hand lying by the side and the other lying across the body. The head was slightly inclined to one side. He ran home to tell his mother, who summoned the doctor, police, and Edward Shue. By the time the doctor, George Knapp, got to the house, Shue had already taken his wife's body to a bedroom and dressed her for burial. He was cradling Zona's head and shoulders in his arms and rocking with grief. Knapp made a brief examination and declared Zona's death was due to an everlasting faint, what more modern doctors call a heart attack. According to some reports, the doctor later changed the cause of death to complications due to pregnancy, but Zona hadn't told anybody that she was pregnant and wasn't showing any signs of pregnancy at the time. Shue dressed his deceased bride in a high-collared dress himself. This was a break with tradition, as women from the community would usually prepare a body for burial. He placed her body in a coffin, and Zona's remains were transported to her mother, Mary Jane Hester's home, which was a few miles away on Big Sewell Mountain. Oddly, during the viewing of Zona's body, Shue did not leave his wife's side, remaining close to her casket and grieving, seeming to keep mourners from viewing the body too closely. But Mary Heaster did not trust Trout Shue, and she did not believe that her daughter had simply dropped dead of a heart attack. She began to pray that her daughter's spirit would return and tell her how she died. Some 4 weeks after her daughter's funeral, Mary said she began to have visions at night of Zona's spirit. 4 nights in a row, Mary said her child appeared to her and claimed she had been abused by Shue. Zona's spirit said Shue was abusive. She said he had choked her, crushing her windpipe and breaking the top vertebrae in her neck. Mary said one night, as her daughter's spirit departed, Zona turned her head completely around, displaying the damage that had been done to her physical body. At first, no one believed Mary's ghostly tale, thinking it was simply a mother's grief, but Mary convinced her neighbors and her brother of its truth, and together they approached a lawyer named John Alfred Preston. He didn't believe Mary right away, but after Preston spoke to Dr. Knapp, who said that he had not closely examined Zona's body, and some of the neighbors described Shue's strange behavior at the visitation, he obtained a warrant to exhume Zona's body for an autopsy. The body was exhumed on February 22nd, 1897. Shue was required to attend the autopsy, though he protested. According to oral tradition, he said, "But they will not be able to prove that I did it." A later story, printed by the Monroe Watchman newspaper, said Shue sat whittling on a stick while his wife's body was examined. It reported, he seemed unconcerned until the doctor started working around her neck, when Shue showed signs of extreme nervousness. Shockingly, the story purportedly told by Zona's ghost about her cause of death was confirmed. The autopsy showed that her neck had been broken and her windpipe crushed, showing that she had been strangled. Edward Trout Shue was arrested for his wife's murder. The trial took place in June 1897. Prosecutors didn't want Mary to speak about her ghostly visions, but the defense asked about them, hoping to discredit her. But Mary stuck to her story and insisted it was true, and it was compelling. Judge J.W. McWhirter, who presided over the trial, described Mary's testimony on the stand in a letter to a friend after the event. McWhirter wrote what Mary claimed her daughter told her on the 3rd night of her appearance. "I told him supper was ready, and he began to chide me because I had prepared no meat for supper. And I reminded him that there was plenty. There was bread and butter, applesauce, preserves, and other things that made a very good supper. And he flew mad and got up and came towards me. When I raised up, he seized each side of my head with his hands, and by a sudden wrench, dislocated my neck." The judge went on to relate how Mary had kept a sheet that had been wadded around Zona's neck in her coffin. But it began to smell, and when she washed it, a red liquid oozed out and dyed the sheet. The sheet was displayed in court, and the judge said it was a decidedly reddish color. McWhirter said that he had never been to Zona's home, and neither had Mary, but Zona's spirit described the place in such detail that when he spoke to a friend about its location, based on Mary's testimony alone, they believed he had been there. Finally, he wrote that Shue had been heard to say that he wanted to be married 7 times in his life. It was revealed during the trial that Shue had been married twice before his final marriage to Zona. His first wife divorced him, and listed in the court documents that he had been abusive. Shue's second wife died under mysterious circumstances within a year of their nuptials. One story said she had fallen through ice. Another suggests she died when Shue accidentally dropped a brick on her head as they built a chimney. And it was revealed that between the 2 marriages, Shue had spent 2 years in prison for stealing a horse. Shue took the stand in his own defense during the proceedings. A local newspaper, the Greenbrier Independent, reported he admitted that he had served a turn in the pan, declared that he dearly loved his wife, and appealed to the jury to look into his face and then say if he was guilty. His testimony, manner, and so forth made an unfavorable impression on the spectators. He denied the circumstantial evidence arrayed against him, but the jury was convinced otherwise. The trial only lasted 8 days, and deliberations went on for a little more than an hour. Judge McWhirter could not instruct the jury to ignore the testimony about the ghost, because it had been brought up by the defense, not the prosecution. Shue was found guilty of first-degree murder. Most of the jury thought he deserved the death penalty, but it was not unanimous, so he was instead sentenced to life in prison. Following the trial in July, a lynch mob formed to hang Shue, but authorities heard about the mob and the sheriff was able to protect him by hiding him in the woods. Shue was said to be so terrified of the mob that he was unable to tie his own shoes. The sheriff confronted the mob and persuaded them to lay down their arms and go home. 4 of them were later indicted for attempted lynching. Shue was imprisoned at the state prison in Moundsville. He died of an unknown epidemic that went through the prison population in March 1900 and was buried in an unmarked grave. Mary Heaster maintained throughout the rest of her life that she had been visited by her daughter's ghost. She died in September 1916. Of course, people still argue whether Edward Shue was guilty, but it's rather amazing that Zona Shue's actual cause of death was uncovered. Still, it's hard to believe that as late as 1897 that a U.S. jury took the testimony of a ghost as credible evidence, although it was supported by a strong circumstantial case. On U.S. Highway 60, in front of Sam Black Church in West Virginia, there is a sign commemorating Zona Shue. It reads in part, "Interned in nearby cemetery is Zona Hester Shue. Her death was presumed to be natural until her spirit visited her mother to describe how she had been killed by her husband, Edward." I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.